Hello, thank you all for coming today. It's wonderful to see everyone. And we are very thrilled to welcome two great authors today, Kestin and Nancy Vonk. And they are here to speak about their experiences in their two books, their most recent of which is Darling, You Can't Do Both, and Other Noise to Ignore on Your Way Up. Now we have a few of their highlights here on the slide right here. Most famously, they were co-chief creative officers at Ogilvy in Toronto, where they helped lead the Dove campaign for real beauty. And so they can talk a lot about, as their book does, the challenges, the misconceptions that women face at work, especially in creative roles, and how they overcame them and have led teams globally to also overcome them. So please give a very warm welcome.
Hello, women and some dudes. It's really nice to see you, and thank you, Karen, so much for inviting us in. I'm the Janet one. She's the Nancy one. And as Karen said, we are the ex-co-chief creative officers. There's a title. Ex-co-chief creative officers of Ogilvy and Mather in Toronto. And we were a creative team, writer, art director team that made it up into really big jobs by bending, breaking, and ignoring the rules of the advertising business. And I have to say, mostly we did that unconsciously, but it was an amazing strategy for us. So now we go out of our way to promote consciously ignoring, bending, breaking as many rules as you can, because we think that it is a great aid to success in anyone's career and can be amazingly useful. Karen put up the cover of the book. I'm going to put up my favorite picture of the cover of the book. You will notice that it is on a cake from the book launch, because I deeply believe that everything goes better with cake, and that's really all you need to know about me. Writing a book was never on our to-do list. At this point, there was no, do some ads, check, throw a birthday party for your kid, check, write a book, check. No, there was none of that for us. We gave a speech a few years ago at an event called Women of Influence in Toronto, which is one of those come in and tell us your career story events. And at the end, this young woman walked up to us and she said, you guys broke every rule of business to get where you got, and I think that's a book. Okay. That would have just been a really nice compliment, except that she turned out to be an editor at HarperCollins, and she wasn't kidding. So, okay, we decided that we would write a book. And one of the threads through all of that, through the speech that we gave, and through the book, is actually Dove. Because Nancy and I worked on Dove from the very first minute of our careers together until the very last. So if you kind of have a companion through your career, Dove was ours, and it was really a bar of soap that taught us to just blow up everything we knew about advertising and business in general. So the rule, actually I'm going to show you something from the more recent campaign just to set the stage.
Okay, folks, so very quiet, please. Cameras rolling. And we're recording sound. Slated. Sounds great.
So the Campaign for Real Beauty is probably what we're, best known for, most associated with. And you have to break rules like mad to work like that. And the one that we broke most often in our careers, and the one that really enabled almost everything that worked for us, play it safe. And really, it's the do it how it's always been done rule. And does anybody here kind of fall into that trap? I will tell you that we did a lot. In fact, my very first job, my first creative director, here was the advice they gave me. I knew nothing about advertising. I just stumbled in, right? And they said, okay, here, grab a pen. And my first creative director, she always said, stand in the same place and wear the same hat. What does that mean, people? I have no idea, but I kind of assumed it meant if things were working, leave well enough alone. And so I think that is the message. If something works, let's just keep on doing it. Why not? And what that means is that we tend to play it safe. And we tend to try and keep things the way they are for all kinds of reasons. And we did it many times. It didn't always seem important to try and change things up. It didn't seem necessary to change things up, especially when what you're working with is already having great success. But then we started working on Dove. And it happened that Dove was about to run out of patent. And our client knew that Olay was making an identical bar. And he figured that the historical work on Dove, which was, a pour shot turning into a bar of soap, and the words 1/4 moisturizing cream, and real women testimonials where women would do things like run their hands across their cheeks and say, my husband loves my soft, smooth skin. And, that was Dove at the time. And he realized that kind of work was not actually going to protect the brand in the future. And so he said to us, I want you to build a fortress around this brand, which is pretty much the best brief probably any human being's ever been given in the history of advertising. And that led us to throw out everything. So the first piece of work that Nancy and I ever did together was for Dove, and it had no women, it had no pour shots, it had none of the usual suspects. What it did have was a lineup of soaps with their names underneath and some litmus paper that showed what happened when you touched that litmus paper to the soaps, and it was to demonstrate mildness, Dove as compared to others. So we used science. We used rational to get to an emotional response, because women were mightily peeved when they saw that all these other ones actually weren't great. And we just felt like we wanted women to be treated intelligently. And so we did the kind of work we would want to see ourselves. And we got in enormous amounts of trouble for this, because Dove was immensely successful using, its past formula. And we got in all kinds of trouble from our bosses, and wasn't broke. US. And yes, and Unilever in the US and Ogilvy in the US. We were just in all kinds of trouble. But then the sales went crazy. And so the brand, which was already number one, suddenly became, number one-est. And that was a huge lesson for us, because what we learned was if you reach higher than average, if you don't accept the status quo, and your client can see the win for that, the people that you work with can see the win for that, then you actually manage to jump across all of the barriers. Because it's very easy when you're just trying to ratchet something up a little bit to, it's easy for people to put barriers in the way and debate it with you and whatnot. But if you show them something that just changes the conversation completely, all of a sudden, people are willing to try things. And As long as it's solving the problem, people are much more open than we would ever expect them to be. Another example of us not doing it the way it's always been done is for a cereal brand that was in Canada called Shreddies. It's kind of like Wheat Chex. They don't sell it here, and it was a brand. The strategy for it had always been nutritious and delicious and made with 100% whole grain wheat. And anybody who's ever worked in an agency, you kind of know that strategy. And it was always sold by these two cartoon Shreddies called Freddie and Eddie, and had been so since I was a kid. And so it had been around a long time. People liked it just fine. But it had been tanking for about 10 years, and Post had decided to put it out of its misery. But they just wanted, it was such an important brand. They just wanted to give it one more shot. And so they came to us with an exciting new opportunity. In order to save this brand, could we just try one more thing? And the brief was nutritious and delicious and 100% whole grain wheat, but better this time. Do something more interesting. And to us, that kind of was like Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Just doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So instead, we did this.
For 68 years, Shreddy cereal remained the same. Wheat squares. And that's what Canadians thought of when they thought of Shreddy's personality. Squares. Until now, under the guidance of the world's leading scientists, we created a cereal revolution, Diamond Shreddies. To promote this angular upgrade, we created a multimedia campaign that included a package redesign, outdoor, television,
Shreddies are supposed to be square.
Have any of these diamond shapes gone out?
print. Yes. Funny. Uh-oh. A website. And viral videos.
It's kind of like thinking about a 6 or a 9, like a 6. If you flip it over, it looks like a 9, but a 6 is very different from a 9.
M and a W.
An M and a W, exactly.
Actually, when you don't see it, like when I sat there, I think you just look like you turn it on its end, but when you see it like that, it's more interesting looking.
Just try both of them. Take a square one there first. Which one did you prefer, first of all?
The first one.
The first one?
It had more flavor.
Okay. That's interesting, because the first one was the diamond.
The diamond one felt more crunchy.
It's sort of out of a popping, sort of 3D effect.
Now, when Canadians think of Diamond Shreddies, they think of 45 more degrees of delicious.
Those were, by the way, real people in the focus groups. So, and in fact, the guy who said, tasted better, the diamond one tasted better, turned out to be the librarian at my daughter's school. So make of that what you will about Canadians or people in focus groups.
Yeah, really, so much for the vaunted Canadian public school system. So how do you do that kind of work when the history has been Freddie and Eddie, Shreddy, the famous Shreddy brothers? Again, you do it by reaching higher, by maybe throwing out what's been given to you. What we actually knew from the research on this stuff was that people still loved this brand, and they didn't actually want to change it in any way. They liked it fine. They'd just forgotten about it because cereal is a news-driven brand, and there wasn't any. It had been the same since the dawn of time. And so it just wasn't on anybody's radar. So instead of nutritious and delicious, blah, 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 we changed that brief. We kind of rewrote it for ourselves to say, given that Canadians have forgotten about Shreddies, how do we make everyone talk about it? Seems like a big hill to climb. Who talks about cereal, really? Nobody. That's who talks about it. So that just seemed like a really big stretch for us to try and get there. So in order to do that, we brought together this totally unorthodox team. We had people who worked on it, creatives that worked on the brand and some that didn't. We had interns and people who'd been working forever. We had strategy people, account people, a comedian from Second City, a junior client, all part of the team from the beginning. And that was a very atypical way for us to work, even though we were great believers in teamwork. We'd never put together such a diverse group of people to try and solve a problem. And there were so many interesting ideas because there were so many perspectives brought to the table. And in the end, that what you saw was the idea of our summer intern, if you can believe it. He didn't even have a job, so we would have been real idiots not to hire him. And he had the idea, but he didn't know what to do with it because he was very junior. And so we had all our senior people then work with him on bringing that idea to life, and they weren't super thrilled about that initially. And then everybody got a piece of the action, and that wonderful campaign was born. So the less homogenous the group was, the more interesting and surprising the outcomes were. And again, that taught us a lot. And we applied that team approach, that kind of co-working approach, even to our own jobs as chief creative officers. When we were invited to, step up into that role, the convention was one boss, one voice, one person's vision leading everybody else along the way. But we were moms with young kids, and we didn't want to screw up the job, and we almost as much didn't want to screw up our kids. No, I'm kidding. We didn't want to screw up the job or our kids, and we figured the only way that we could achieve that was to actually redesign the job to suit us and break that convention once again. And we didn't know how it would work, and we were lucky that we worked in a place that was experimental and open, and they allowed us to try it. And what we found was our clients got more attention, the people who worked for us got more attention, and overall the work got better. So it was, once again, not how it was done, but it worked like crazy.
So we also recommend breaking the rule to play it safe and do things the way they've always been done. When it comes to how we show up every day, we're kind of told from the beginning in so many words to toe the line, to conform. That's normal. But rather than do that all the time, we became known for being honest. So towing the line and being honest are not always compatible. And Janet and I just, again, it wasn't a mindful strategy. It wasn't like, okay, do we agree? We'll be honest. That wasn't what was going on, but that's how we showed up. And again, looking back and reflecting on what worked so well for us, that was a big part of it. We said most of the time what we really thought, which is not hard to do if there's no penalty for it, potentially, but sometimes when you're telling tough work, if you have something honest but difficult to say to the boss or to the client, or for that matter to employees or peers, it can be very, very uncomfortable. And indeed, we did get in trouble with it more than once, way more than once. I have been thrown off accounts numerous times. Janet's been fired twice.
Can you believe that?
I think she's proud of it at this point. She's good with it. She's good with it. So, being honest can have its price. I have pissed off many a boss. I've really super pissed off a global boss when I decided to speak up and be honest about how I felt about him making extraordinarily misogynist remarks at a public event where he was the keynote speaker, which kind of got reported around the world and led to him losing his job. he left his job. So that certainly was not the easiest time, to be honest, but it was clear to me, and it was clear to Janet at the time too, that it was really important to say what we really thought. And yes, we paid a big price for a little while, but no regrets. Actually, not even 1 minute of regret ever since that happened. It was the right thing to do. So what we found is that being honest consistently is a really good career strategy. Sounds kind of strangely simple, doesn't it? But when you think about it, it can be really hard to do. Playing the long game, acknowledging there can be short-term real difficulties, like getting fired, it's a really good way to go. And a big reason why it's such a good way to go is that when you are known for speaking the truth, your truth, people trust you. People trust you more when you can be counted on for showing up truthfully. We found that some of our clients, even the ones who thought we were the biggest pains in the butts for our candid, thoughts, came to insist on us being in the room. Bosses came to really appreciate that that's how we were showing up. It was highly valued. I can remember many clients who started to see us as trusted advisors and counselors in the toughest moments. So that was a great benefit. And we didn't worry so much about being liked all the time. We all want to be liked, right? Who doesn't want to be liked? But the fact is, we can all actually, if we take that too far, it can start to penalize us, especially as we go higher up into leadership roles. We found things went best when we focused on taking the long view of any given situation. How's it likely to land, and acting accordingly, rather than being grounded in just the moment. If all we worried about was the present moment, it's not that hard to do whatever puts smiles on faces and goes over well. But when you take the long view, especially in difficult moments, that really pays off, and it can often mean it's quite a different course of action to take than what we might do in that just short run to keep things going smoothly. And did we always? No. Did we always do that? No, but we usually did. We found things went best when, in other words, when we were true to ourselves, even in situations filled with conflict. And we were true to ourselves. We spent years researching women's experiences to write Darling, You Can't Do Both. And what an education it was. We didn't actually show up, having been women for a long time and all, with all the answers by any means. So I think of that as the best part of writing the book, is how much I learned by talking to women across industries at every level of industries. And what we learned, one of the things we learned, was that one of the biggest areas of difficulty for women is navigating conflict. It's no treat for men either, and I'm sure every man in here would say, oh yeah, I love conflict. No, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to get through these moments. And if you're a woman, something we learned is that this actually has quite clear roots for most of us in having been raised as pleasers. Something I might have thought is, didn't that stop in the 60s or something? But no, to this day, we found that girls are getting the message from the time they can't even talk yet to put the smile on the face, go along, be nice, defer to others, be a pleaser. You'll be rewarded for it. By the way, does anybody here relate as, yeah, I'm a pleaser? And we work with tons of men, and most of them would also put their hands up. So again, not necessarily something that only happens with women. And I have to say, it becomes more understandable a lot of things become more understandable when we can appreciate what psychology today said, which is that for women going into careers, it's become hardwired to be a pleaser. It's become hardwired, and it feels so wrong to step out of that behavior because it is hardwired. It's been at play all our lives. So I would have told you several years ago, I'm not a pleaser. I'm no. You know, I have no problem saying the unpopular words.
She's
I
a
have no
badass.
problem.
It's true.
I'm so badass. But in fact, having been prompted to look much more closely at this whole phenomenon, I had to admit when I thought about my actions that day in and day out, I was going along and doing things that I didn't think were necessarily the right thing to do for the sake of making people happy, for the sake of getting that short-term reward. In fact, I can see looking back that so often when things went sideways, when there was not a good result on something, that I could trace back to a yes I had said that should have been a no. So I'll give you a few examples as long as I'm outing myself. So some typical examples, especially as an art director, when I took on that one more project that everything I was working on was going to collapse, thanks to that. Just couldn't bring myself to say no. And certainly, we're all in yes businesses, right? We're all there to say, yes, I can do it. Yes, I can deliver. But when we ignore objective information that says, you know what? No good can come from this. Then that's when we're at real risk of it's not going to land well. I said yes many times when I should have said no to work that was put in front of me that wasn't up to my hopes and expectations. And many good, so-called good reasons to do this. Well, it's due tomorrow. I've got to say yes. Oh my God, if I say no to that star person one more time, I've said no so much lately, I'm afraid they're just going to start looking for something else. I'd better give the green light on this one, and so on and so forth. But wow, what a thing to get wrong as someone passing judgment on the ultimate product that we're sending out the door. Saying okay to what's not good enough and not drilling down into maybe more possibilities, moving the deadline, etc. Or accepting that somebody might quit. Okay, that'll just be too bad if they can't take that. So I didn't say no often enough when it came to the work. I didn't say no when pressured to cancel a long planned vacation a few times because there was an emergency. Well, I'm like headed for burnout. You know, geez, did I need it? Would it have been a good thing to recharge my batteries? Yes. Would it have been a good thing not to let down my family? Yes. So another typical experience. And on the hiring front or retention front, which so many of us are concerned about, I can think of a time when I gave a promotion to a team that really wanted the bigger title, or they were leaving and going over to another agency. I'm thinking not ready for that title, not ready. But oh man, I'm gonna have all these problems if they leave right now. I better cross my fingers and hope it's gonna work out. What could possibly go wrong? So much went wrong. So I won't go down that rabbit hole standing here because I could talk about that for about 2 hours. So fundamentally, I hope I'm registering that we can pay big prices for keeping waters smooth. We can really pay big prices. And to be sure, when things don't land well and we said the yes under pressure, guess who's going to wear it? Not the person pressuring us. We're wearing it. We're wearing it. And if we have said yes too many times when we should have said no, this is, believe me, not only is it hurting perhaps work, quality of work, but our reputations suffer. Our people under us aren't respecting us for it. when there's mediocrity going out the door, thanks to our too many yeses, we are absolutely going to hit career walls. As just some examples of things that can really go wrong. So life's not fair. We're wearing it. And it feels awful too to say yes when we really feel no was the right answer. So what about it, right? So am I really going to stand here and say no a whole bunch more times and you're good to go? No, I would like to give you something to do about it. And what we have found is that you could use a little bit of technique when the pressure's on, at that moment of decision. Do I say yes or no? What a good question, right? Because it's often a very fine line. Do I say yes or no? A little technique in the form of simple questions to ask yourself before you go ahead and commit to whoever's pressuring you. Ask yourself first, what's the worst that can happen with no? What's the worst that can happen with no? Often we are filled with fear at a time like this, and we go straight to worst case scenario. So I can't tell you how many times I've been coaching extremely successful senior people, and we'll discuss a situation where they're leaping to, well, I'm going to get fired. And I'm thinking, you're so not going to get fired. Why do we do that? It's because we're not thinking straight. If you have fear going on for repercussions, literally your ability to reason is dropping like a stone. So this is brain science. You're not thinking straight. So it helps to step back, maybe buy some time to be thinking this question before you commit to a yes. To calm down and think about what's the truth, what's the worst that can happen. So often it's nothing but very short-term conflict. Short-term, somebody's not happy, but we're all going to live, and things can stay on the rails to get to a good outcome. Now, the second question to ask yourself is an even better one, which is, what's the worst that can happen if I say yes? What's the worst that can happen if I say yes? This question demands that you think through to the outcome and get past being stuck in the moment where it seems so obvious, I'd better say yes, I'd better see everybody nodding, to think through, how's that going to land? You know, if I'd thought through with this team that wanted the promotion, if I'd thought through that question harder, it wouldn't have been that hard to figure out a number of likelihoods of what could go wrong that was worse than them leaving. It was way worse that they didn't leave. As just one example. So a really excellent question to ask yourself. And when you've really worked through those two questions, it can become much clearer what's the right way to go forward, yes or no. It can help to have, by the way, objective eyes on this. Grab a trusted peer, have them go through those questions with you. They're not feeling fearful. Their reasoning powers aren't reduced. That can be worth its weight in gold. And by all means, if you decide no is the way to go, think through how you say no. And it's important to have taken that person pressuring you to do the wrong thing through what you are afraid is going to happen. Bring it to life for them. They haven't thought about it. You can bring it to life for them. They can see how you're going to save you from them from themselves. Do them that favor. Do the team that favor. I think of it as tell them the story that would keep them up at night if you say yes to them. So that's so important. For that to be clear, we can underestimate just how clear it needs to be as we worry about being seen as not a team player, not somebody that's willing to pull out all the stops, other negative judgments. No, let's understand what's at risk here. And ultimately, finally, we need to be seen as somebody who is there committed to the success of that person and the team. This is where you live to tell. If you're making it very clear, I feel I cannot deliver on this thing that, let's say, the one extra task that meant everything I was working on was going to suck. If you're making clear everything's going, you know what? Here's the situation. I'm afraid this and this and this is going through the cracks. Then you're much more likely to get the understanding and the appreciation for what you're showing up to do. and saying, you know what, I can do this much, but not that, at least not by that deadline. Or I could engage so-and-so to help get this done. Shows that you are there committed to everyone's success. So, simple technique. We have taught this at greater length, but fundamentally given this simple technique to hundreds and hundreds of people at this point, and hear amazing feedback on how much it is helpful to get to a smart conclusion and to see better outcomes. And I just want to leave you with the observation that if you show up with this kind of smart process and consistently are giving the right response to conflict, you're not going to be seen as somebody who is, not willing to give it their all, not a team player. You're going to be seen as a leader. So this is the part where we stop talking, or we will talk, but we'd love to hear any questions, anything you want to talk about. Of course, there's so much more in this book that has about 12 rules that we recommend people break. We've just focused on one today, but it includes breaking the rule career or family. Pick one. There's a pretty big topic. How do we pull that off? How do both men and women pull that off? It's hard. So we have a lot to say about that. We have a lot to say about stepping into the spotlight, rule to break, work hard, do a good job, and all good things will come to you. Good things come to those who wait. Not so much. Not so much.
Well, thank you. This was great. The book, as Nancy was saying, is set up as myths and rules and misconceptions and how they all broke them. Before we open this up to questions, one of my favorite ones that you ask is, does gender bias still exist today? Is it still a factor? I know at Salesforce we openly discuss this a lot, and interestingly, as two women, you were both divided on this topic at first, and I know you hear all kinds of opinions on this within our own walls too. Can you talk about that for a minute?
So yeah, I will say that for me, it was really obvious from early on that it was a real thing. I grew up in a family of girls, and my dad wasn't like a business guy; he was an independent entrepreneur, and so we were just raised to believe that girls could do anything, because in our family there were only girls, and then I started working. And one of the very first things that happened to me was that I wanted to, I was really junior, I wanted to work on a beer account. And in those days, beer was like the marquee thing. And, if you wanted to make your mark, that's where you were. And so I went to ask the account director if I could participate in this. And he said to me in all seriousness, "You can no more understand beer than I can understand tampons." Really, in his out loud voice, he said that, and hello, that was practically my introduction to what it was like working in advertising, and partly because that happened, and then eventually when I did get to work on it, they wouldn't let me come into meetings. So when I did. Because that happened to me, I really paid a lot of attention to that through the remainder of my career, and I wrote articles about it and all of that. And I shared some of that with my good friend and partner here, who had a very, very different growing up experience than I had in the business. And for her.
And for me, until I saw it, I couldn't believe it. And I think this, and I didn't see it, honestly. I mentioned that I called out our global CCO for wildly misogynist remarks about women not being able to cut it at the top, only put in incredibly vulgar terms that I will not repeat. And it was truly, it was like in a moment, everything changed. I went all the way from there's no issue with gender. I don't even want to know about gender stuff. Like, I don't even want to be thought of as a woman in the business. I want to be thought of as a talented, creative person in the business. So, once I saw it, I also could come to terms with the fact I'd been in denial and looked the other way a zillion times. And so, whereas I absolutely don't think that men are just out to get us, as women. I do think there's a lot of, notwithstanding the example of my former global CCO, I think absolutely people are showing up with unconscious bias. We're all biased, actually. So that's just the human condition. I think that's at play. I don't think there's bad intentions. I really don't. But I do think that, and I do think, like so many things in life, if we can't see it, when we don't see it, we don't believe it. So it's very common still for us to hear women at all stages of their careers say, I don't even, what is this? What are we going on about? Let alone the guys who don't, on the whole, tend to recognize gender bias as a thing. Another benefit of doing the book and doing so much research was having that much deeper understanding of studies done on, by organizations that commit themselves to understanding what's going on. And I think one of the biggest disruptors of gender bias, like how are we ever going to really confront this and tackle it, is so simple, and it's not happening. Which is, if you look at the UN Women He for She campaign, they really articulate this well. Until women and men, when they see that moment of bias showing, which could seem so innocent, and yet if it's belittling to a woman in any way, there's gender bias going on right there. Until we call it out and think of that as a teachable moment, nothing's going to change. So not blaming or shaming or doing something in that moment, screaming at somebody, but taking them aside, not in a situation where they're going to be embarrassed, to just literally share what you thought just happened there, whether it happened to you or you observed it happen to someone else. Really hard to do, right? Like, oh gee, how welcome my thoughts will be when I do that. So we have to go ahead and accept it's not going to be welcome, or it will be, thank you, I didn't have any idea. I didn't mean it that way. I wasn't thinking, I think they're fantastic. Apparently that's one of the most meaningful things we could ever do. And note to women, we don't speak, we do not, we don't even talk with each other. We don't even talk with each other about this subject very much. So the more women even talk with each other about it, also the better, let alone men talking with each other.
Great. I want to open this up to questions from the room. If anyone's shy, can ask another one. Thanks, Grace.
Hi, I'm Sarah. Just going on what you were talking about, do you have any kind of actual sound bites you might share in terms of language to use, in terms of how to strike the balance between not blaming and shaming someone, but having the right language? I think a lot of times the communication is just frozen because you're like, I don't have the right language. I'm either going to blow up in this person's face or say it in a really nice way that's constructive, where that person feels good and learns something from it. Any suggestions?
Absolutely a starting point of not like, I'm on the attack to make you feel like crap. I think if you adopt a mindset of, I'm going to assume they didn't realize what they just did. I'm going to assume all the best. I'm going to give them all the benefit of the doubt. And so mindset of, I'm showing up to point out something that you suspect that they didn't realize happened. How something that was said just landed with that other person, whether it's you or what you think happened with the other person. So that's automatically, doing that in private and doing it so there's no embarrassment going on in front of others. And in all, with a positive aura around you, as opposed to, you giant jerk. Although I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't say that should never happen, but more often than not, it's going to be heard. You don't want somebody to just shut down. So if we show up with any whiff of, I'm judging you, people are going to shut down. They're not going to hear it, and it will not have been worth your while. So
I know a young woman, and she works in a place that is mostly guys. So there's a lot of, the jokiness and, all the kind of things. And she's one of a very few women, and she's relatively young. And she's a friend of my son. And she found it incredibly awkward, and she didn't know what to say, and she was often embarrassed in the conversations, like where there was just a particular kind of guys talking to guys vibe in the room. And anyway, eventually she went to one of them anyway, and she said, I know you don't mean this in the way that you're saying it, but I share with you how it made me feel. And she just, and she's a talented woman, and she's a respected woman, and there's this sense that she's just one of the guys, right? But she's not one of the guys. She's herself. And we have a client who was often, really senior client, who was often the only woman in the room, and she always used to say, I felt like I raised the tone. And she was just really good about saying, this is how that made me feel. And because nobody really is coming with ill intentions, as Nancy says, for somebody to share with you how they were feeling as a result of that generally makes people more aware of what they're saying and who's around when they say it, and also provokes conversation.
Awesome. So you talked about not playing it safe. So in your day-to-day, how do you know, or how do you determine sort of when and when not to reinvent the wheel, right? Because there's obviously those big things, but then there's a lot of day-to-day stuff, especially as we've been sort of conditioned, maybe it's fine. Do you have tactics or tips for that?
We promote in our leadership training program shooting high every time. I mean, yes, there's a certain amount of pick your moments. But to more often, to move the dial on, well, how often am I shooting really high? There's the really obvious times that you're going to do it. But the opportunity is to have a mindset of, I'm going to shoot really high as often as I possibly can. And there can be amazing solutions out there if I just decide to have a mindset of, no, I want to reach here, not here. And you know the old saying, if you only shoot for here, you're never going to get past here. It's true. So really broadly speaking, just to think in terms of, well, until there can be workload that's going to mean you have to prioritize, of course. You've got to prioritize your moments to just pull up, to really shoot up here. But an interesting thing in our experience that gives us confidence to say you should try to shoot high every time is we only had really conservative accounts. And in Canada, you're often encouraged to just run what they're doing in the US. So it's so often it seemed like, well, just keep it going and it's working and everybody's happy. But boy, we would have been bored to death if we had just done that. And so with what appeared to be no opportunity to just get it out there, we just looked harder, and we decided to have more ambition for a lot of our brands than the clients had. And then eventually you're the hero with that decision maker for showing up for good. Who doesn't like it as a leader that your employee showed up with big ambition? Everybody likes it. And the trick is time management. It's true.
Hi.
Hi.
I was going to ask, how do you get buy-in from your peers or your teams or your leaders when you have ideas that are really out of the box or radical? You want to move forward, but you need to kind of socialize it before putting time and energy into it.
I think you said the word socialize, and I think that's actually the key. And the way that we tended to do that was actually to involve people a lot earlier. We didn't wait until we had something and it was all crafted and thought through and perfect before. And of course, initially we did. We used to do what everybody does. You do your thing, you make it look as pretty as possible, and whatever the convention is in your office, and you take it to whoever it is that needs to pronounce on it. But we came to believe that it was really important to make other people feel like it was their idea. And the way that you do that, and you know what I said about bringing all those disparate people together to work on the Shreddies thing? That was, there was no thinking at that point. There was only a problem to be solved. And we brought all kinds of people who by rights should not have been in that room. You know, if you live by the rules that we're mostly raised with. None of those people, 90% of those people shouldn't have had their mitts on the work. And we had creative people who were not thrilled with the choice that we made to bring all those voices into the early dialogue. But so many interesting thoughts came at that point. And even if you don't use any of them, if you actually are hearing other people's ideas early on and letting them see your thinking early on, letting them to participate, then they know that their views have been considered as part of the project. And you can't believe how much easier it makes the sell of hard things when people feel like they've been part of that process. So for us, we actually completely changed the way we worked. We used to work in a very, we were always a bit, pokey about things, but we worked in a fairly usual style, and then we just changed it, and it worked so much better.
Yeah, that early exposed people to thinking way earlier than normal. It was a real revelation to us, and again, that's something we promote to everyone.
And we got away with
let people in way sooner than normal. Buy-in is going to not only will buy-in go on so much better, but the thinking will be better on the whole when you get that input early.
I have a question. Your work and your partnership has been a shining example as long as I have been a creative or wanted to be in the creative field. And I was wondering if you have any advice for people that are looking to. One of the things that's interesting about your partnership is that it seems to like change and flex as the years go on, and like the roles that you've been in and the way that you've structured your work and how your working structure and your time management. Do you have any practical advice for people in this room that are interested in making their career and their role a little bit different? Like, are there actual things that you've done to, like, did you have conversations about that? Is it like your last answer where you socialized it ahead of time? Like, how did you go about making your career, your work life, fit the life, so that you could create great work?
We have to stop for a moment and acknowledge we know each other.
Yes, we do.
This was the most wonderful moment before everybody showed up. Oh, hello. Here's Lauren. And oh, hello. And there she is with her baby. And suddenly it's like, oh, yes, 10 years ago we met. She was coming out of VCU Brand Center and started a blog for women that was absolutely breakthrough at that time. It was starting a conversation that did not exist amongst the youngest women in the industry. So it was the best reunion with a baby in front of you. So awesome. The
question sort of presupposes that there was method to our madness.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll say there wasn't. There really truly wasn't. We were not the where are you going to be in 5 years people at all. We mostly, I think we've been very lucky in that we were tremendously compatible, and we have worked with other partners before, and it didn't work out so well. And it didn't, we might have liked them, but the work wasn't great, or the work was good, but we didn't like working with them. So working together for us, in our lives, finding each other was actually key to a lot of the quality of work that we did, and also decisions that we made. And we worked for a number of years just as a writer and art director, and it was great. We had the most fun ever. And then we started to take on little things that grew us up that we didn't do for that reason. Like, we started to actively mentor people. We started to, we ran an internship program at Ogilvy that became very, very well known. And if if people went through that program, it was a bit the good housekeeping seal of approval for other agencies hiring away our people. We wrote an advice column online for 10 years. We wrote a book out of that. And so essentially what we were doing all the way along without realizing it was, in doing things that we were interested in doing, we were setting ourselves up for becoming creative leads. Like, we were learning how to lead through the mentoring process that we did. And we learned kind of a new career accidentally, just through following our own hearts in terms of what was interesting to us, which was talent development. And we were always incredibly passionate about it. As much as we were excited and loved the work, we were just insanely in love with people and making sure they could be the best they could be. So I think that I'd like to tell you that we actually had a plan. What we had was each other and the happy coincidence of kind of growing more or less at the same rate, and therefore growing up at the same rate and getting out at the same rate, like deciding we were done at the same time.
I think there's I think something to take away from our experience is that team matters.
Yeah.
Chemistry matters, and that the idea is not to be with the person you like the most and feel most comfortable with. Because bland can come out of that. And we all have bias for being with people like ourselves. So that's a trap, actually. And Janet and I, as much as we are attached at the hip, we are so different from each other. And we don't think exactly alike. We can come to consensus really well. Like, we've learned to benefit from the differences in our perspectives. And we bought into creating teams when we became bosses that were teams that worked. And there's such a thing as teams that don't work well together. So that's something that we can encourage everyone to do. Everybody doesn't work in a duo like we did, of course. And but I think that is a broader lesson, is that it pays to put up your hand if a team you're in is, oh my goodness, you're just finding it and isn't working, and you feel like you're not getting to a good outcome, to approach the leader and say, is there you know what, I'm not working well in this group. Is there another opportunity for me? It's worth thinking of team that way.
And I'm going to add one more thing, which I think is really important, whether you're male or female, but it's particularly key to the career success of women. And that is, I mentioned mentoring before. Having one and being one is unbelievably useful, because finding one, it really happens organically for men. It's harder for that to happen organically for women. So if there's somebody in this company that you think, I would so love to have that person as my spirit guide, and even if they are, the toppiest people, ask them. Like, find the people that you feel will help you grow and guide you and explain the system and understand the politics and understand how business works and people work best together. And there's so much to be learned from them, and never mind what they'll learn from you. You can't underestimate what you have to give, not just what you have to get. And then start doing it yourself, like pay it forward. And for us, that probably was the single biggest key to us finding each stage of our career.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Nancy and Janet. The book is fantastic. There's a lot more advice in it on salary negotiation, on finding mentors and sponsors and the differences between them, and really how to grow your career strategically, especially in a creative role. So
and have kids too.
And have kids too.